Hey guys, it's Celestia, and while PewDiePie might not be the topic you expected to hear about on this channel, he is our topic today nonetheless. Honestly, it might not really come as that much of a surprise given that his recent foray into the art community is, at this point, basically old news. Most people have seen or at least heard about his 2 videos in which he draws daily for cumulatively 100 days, and sees some pretty impressive improvement as a result. Lots of art YouTubers have already long since started and finished weighing in with their thoughts and reactions to this experiment of his. And honestly, the reason I didn't do so myself back when this was still a trending topic that might have actually gotten me some real views was because I didn't really have anything to add at the time. I thought it was really cool to see someone who did not consider himself to be an artist manage to not only rediscover his love for it, but also legitimately prove his skills to an impressive degree in a relatively short period of time. And that was pretty much all there was to it. It certainly wasn't something I had enough to say about to make a dedicated video on. What I did do, however, around the same time as his videos about his 100-day drawing challenge were getting a lot of traction, was make a video where I ranked all of the most common art advice that I and others had heard throughout our lives and artistic journeys on a tier list. 2 of those pieces of advice were ones that, unbeknownst to me, PewDiePie himself had given at the end of his last video of the challenge. To draw every day, and that anyone can improve just like he did if they just practice. On my tier list, I had ranked draw every day at the very bottom of C tier and just practice in D tier, so I naturally got some comments essentially saying, "Ha, PewDiePie sure proved you wrong." So out of a mix of curiosity and bruised pride, I responded to this by actually going over to watch his videos to see if he had, in fact, proven me wrong. Like, I'd seen his improvement already and I was familiar with what the videos were, but I hadn't watched them before that point. And after having done so, my takeaway was actually not nearly so straightforward. At least to me, his videos actually reinforced my beliefs about just practice and draw every day being bad advice based on the criteria I mentioned in that art tier list video. And, at least to me, proved that right. It was only his words that contradicted that. Basically, all of the things that I think make just practice and draw every day such bad advice are things that he actively confronted and avoided during his challenge, proving that there are right ways to utilize that advice that actually make it good, but only when approached from the right perspective. But because he ended the series off with, essentially, "In conclusion, just draw every day and practice and you can do it too," that's not the takeaway that people left with because he didn't verbally acknowledge or adequately explain how he revised his own advice in his own practice of it. And honestly, I don't think that's on him, because I don't personally think that he was fully consciously aware of the ways that he was revising that advice himself. I think he was making common sense decisions about how he approached drawing every day to maximize improvement. But because a lot of people don't have that same approach, or frankly, that amount of common sense, it wouldn't occur to them necessarily to make the same ones. This has led to a lot of people walking away from his art challenge videos with one of 2 feelings. Discouragement, because viewers have themselves been drawing for much longer than 100 days without seeing nearly as much improvement. Or encouragement, because he's motivated them to believe that if he can do it, then if they follow in his footsteps, so can they. Both are valid responses, but I think if we break down exactly what's wrong with the draw every day and just practice art advice mentalities, and how PewDiePie avoided those problems by changing his approach to them in order to maximize improvement, both responses could be challenged more healthily and realistically. Those who walked away from his videos feeling discouraged because their own practice isn't yielding similar improvement will better understand what he's doing differently from them that resulted in that difference. And those who walked away from his videos feeling encouraged that they can do it if he can, have a better understanding of how to actually make that happen for themselves in a manner that's more conducive to actual results than just practicing on its own. Basically, PewDiePie actually proved me right, cowards, he just doesn't know it. So in today's video, we're gonna discuss why I maintain that draw every day and just practice are both still very bad pieces of advice to give artists without any further clarification or context, but can be excellent advice once that clarification and context is provided, and how PewDiePie's art challenge videos are a prime example of both. How giving that advice without context can be damaging and counterproductive, but also how a more directed, introspective, and individually tailored approach to that advice in practice can be incredibly lucrative and helpful. But first, let me take a moment to thank today's sponsor, Ground News. I don't know about you guys, but with the state of the world right now, I'm pretty adamant about staying as informed as possible about what's going on. Unfortunately, when it's borderline impossible to consult a single source for the full story and information is released faster than it can actually be verified, it can be really difficult to stay up to date with information you can really trust about events around the world. That's why I use Ground News, an app and website that combines world news from a multitude of different sources, so that you can compare coverage between each of them based on what their political biases are, whether they're left or right-leaning, how reliable they're known to be, and who owns them. Ground News' blind spot section even highlights news that's specifically being covered disproportionately by one side of the political spectrum, so that you don't miss news that your usual sources might not be talking about. In a world where it's hard not to doom scroll through baseless clickbait headlines reporting fake news on social media, Ground News makes it easy for you to find trusted information on world events from a wide variety of of sources all in one place, and offers both the much-needed reassurance that the information you're getting is verified, and warnings when major media outlets happen to be exaggerating or misrepresenting it. I've been using it myself for several months after seeing a sponsored segment for it over on the Casual Criminalist, and honestly, I swear by it, not only because of how effective it's been at keeping me up to date and informed, but also because it's made me feel legitimately safer. There are a lot of really scary headlines inundating social media journalism, and when you don't know what to trust or who's lying or what's really going on, it's easy to feel lost and scared. Ground News has given me the peace of mind of being able to fact check and verify the headlines I see so that I don't end up panicking over nothing or panicking too little over something, and that's something I can't understate the value of. Personally, I use the Vantage plan to get unlimited access to all of their features, which you can get 15% off of by using the link in the description. Not only does every subscription directly support me and this channel, it also helps Ground News continue to work towards a future where the media landscape is a trustworthy and transparent place. And that's a goal I can endorse with pride. All that out of the way, let's get into the video. Now, in order for me to address both my problems and agreements with PewDiePie's Draw Every Day for 100 Days Challenge videos, I first have to explain why I take issue with the advice of draw every day and just practice to begin with. I did go over this briefly in the tier list video, but given that it was supposed to be a lighthearted, for fun video where I also had to discuss like 20 other pieces of art advice, I didn't go into a ton of detail. So let me clarify now instead. Ultimately, in my opinion, what it comes down to is that both are very reductive pieces of advice that neglect to acknowledge the much wider reaching context and the individual artist's needs, and simplify the entire process of artistic growth and learning into a one-size-fits-all cookie-cutter solution. Just practice, as I mentioned in the art tier list video, is advice that's about as effective as telling a student to just study. It could be said to an entire school's worth of students with different majors and curriculums and be true for all of them, while meaning something entirely different to each of them as individuals. A law student, a medical student, an art student, and a computer science student would all have incredibly different methods of studying. And yes, they all need to do so, and doing so consistently is the only way they'll find real success. But telling them just study without telling them how to based on what they're studying and what they hope to achieve with those studies is deeply unhelpful. It would be one thing to tell a room full of students that all already know how to study, that they need to do so consistently to achieve results. Just study does work as advice being given to a group of people that's already informed on how to do so effectively. But when it comes to artists being given the advice to just practice, that isn't often the case. Most artists being told to just practice are beginners who don't know how to do so properly yet. They don't really know what that means. For many of them, they already have been practicing, it's just that their version of practice isn't informed by any professional or experienced guidance, so it's ineffective. If their version of practice is to draw a front-facing headshot every day based on the instructions of a Chris Hart how to draw manga book, then practicing is quite simply not going to get them very far. Yes, they do need to practice in order to improve, but practice that yields improvement is practice that's tailored to their goals, strengths, and weaknesses, not random practice based on whatever they feel like drawing that day. I will acknowledge, in defense of people giving this advice, that it's usually bad advice in response to a bad question. When people say just practice to an artist, it's usually because the artist asked, "How do I get better at art?" with no further clarification. The problem with just practice is that it's oversimplified advice. Practice that actually leads to improvement and growth is guided practice that's tailored to each individual artist. So the only way for it to be productively proposed to an artist asking for advice is with their individual needs in mind. Essentially, what I mean is that the only way you can productively tell an artist to just practice is to tell them how to practice. But the only way you can tell them how to practice is if you know what weaknesses they need to work on, what goals they want to achieve, what style they want to work in, and so on. When an artist gives you absolutely none of that information and just asks how they can improve, there's no way for just practice not to be both bad advice and also the only advice you can give without more context. Ask a stupid question, get a stupid answer. Or in this case, ask a ridiculously oversimplified question, get a ridiculously oversimplified answer. It's a position I've been in many times before, but because I know how unhelpful just practice is as a response to that question, it's not an answer I give, because it's not the only one there is. When people ask me how to get better at art, I usually tell them to either seek critique from others or critically analyze their own work to pinpoint their weak points, and then develop a study plan based on reputable resources to target those weak points through regular practice of specific materials and studies. It's not necessarily specific enough to be overly helpful, but it's a jumping off point at the very least and maintains the importance of practice without reducing the entirety of the advice to just that. Yes, you have to practice, but you have to practice specific things with guidance, self-awareness, and an individually tailored, well-rounded study plan if you want that practice to lead to improvement. That's why I personally believe that just practice is a reductive, borderline useless piece of advice on its own. It feels like just half a piece of advice. Like if someone asked, "How do I build this Lego Death Star?" and I just said, "Follow the instructions." Yes, that's definitely how they could successfully build a Lego Death Star, but they know that. If they had the instructions, they would follow them, but they're obviously asking me because they don't. I will also mention before moving on that while I acknowledge that just practice is usually only bad advice because it's given in response to a bad question, that being, how do I get better at art, rather than something more informative and specific, like how do I improve my anatomy or something along those lines, I don't necessarily mean to blame the artists asking dumb questions and getting dumb answers as a result. In many cases, the ones asking are beginners who don't know what the right questions actually are yet. They may not be skilled enough yet to recognize what they need to work on is anatomy in the first place, so they obviously wouldn't be informed and self-aware enough to pinpoint that weakness and ask for advice on targeting it specifically. Yes, how do I get better at art is a bad question, but for a lot of beginners, it's the only question they know. Rather than giving them a bad answer like just practice, help them take a more critical look at their art and find the right questions to be asking instead. The other piece of advice I took issue with in the tier list video was to draw every day, which is naturally going to be relevant when discussing a video challenge about drawing every day for 100 days. The basis of my argument against this advice isn't that it's wrong. If you draw every day, you will absolutely improve as a result. But once again, there's a lot more to it than that, and my problem with that being given as advice without further context is that it oversimplifies why it works and erases the relevant context. When you tell someone to draw every day if they want to improve and leave it at that, you neglect to acknowledge that what and how they're drawing will have a significant impact on whether or not they actually do improve. If a person is drawing the same thing over and over again with no reference, studying, critique, experimentation, diversification, and so on, they will absolutely improve at their ability to draw that one thing that one way. But what if the way they're drawing it is technically incorrect, or they want to be able to draw more than just that one thing? As I said in that tier list video, or another video, I've made too many videos, you can polish bronze all you want, but that won't make it gold. Just drawing often, even every day, isn't enough to improve consistently without eventually hitting a plateau where you're the best you can possibly be at drawing that thing that way. You have to combine the consistency of drawing often with critical analysis of what you're drawing and how. Draw every day is advice that won't help an artist if what they're drawing every day is the same thing over and over without any active directed studying on how to draw it better. And yes, there is value in that too. Even if they do just draw the same thing over and over without studying or working to improve, they will still improve just by nature of drawing and getting more and more comfortable and familiar with the act of drawing. Yes, that's incredibly important, especially for beginners. But again, there will come a time when they reach a plateau of improvement if that's all they do, which is why I think this advice is reductive to give on its own. It's why I think so many people are walking away from PewDiePie's drawing for 100 days videos feeling discouraged. So many people are sharing that they've been drawing for a lot longer without seeing anywhere near that much improvement. And in my opinion, that's not because drawing every day is ineffective. It's because being told drawing every day on its own is enough to improve is bad advice. It's partial advice. It's like being told that to get shredded abs, you need to work out every day. It's not wrong, but if you don't get the other half of that advice that contains information on what types of workouts you need to be doing, the half of the advice that you did get, that being the need for consistency and frequency, is useless to you. You can run on a treadmill for 5 hours every day and never get abs, but you'll still have technically been following the advice that you were given. It just won't have worked. Partial advice without the other part of it is about as good as no advice at all in most cases, especially when the part that you're getting is the vastly smaller part. Draw every day when it comes to partial or incomplete advice is effectively like the 2-foot-tall tip of the iceberg barely poking out of the water, with the rest of its relevant context remaining completely submerged. So it's less like you're getting part of a piece of good advice and more like you're getting a tiny fraction of it. So little, in fact, that it's barely usable on its own at all. I'd also like to mention that drawing every day, even if it's just in short bursts or doodles or studies or gesture drawings or whatever else, isn't something that's feasible for everyone. Students, full-time employees, people with disabilities and low energy, there are a lot of people who, be it as a result of their busy schedules, their personal lives, their health, or a multitude of other factors, simply do not have the option to fit drawing into their daily schedules. Making time for art whenever you can is integral to improvement, yes, but forcing yourself to draw every day as if that's your only option for growth, even if it means sacrificing time spent on hobbies or with family or friends or taking care of yourself, should never be encouraged in my opinion. As far as I'm concerned, it's a very hustle culture motivated mindset, and like many aspects of hustle culture, its effectiveness lures you in. Because drawing every day can be so effective when done right in helping you improve at art, it can often motivate us to pressure ourselves to do so even if it burns us out or leaves us making unwanted sacrifices in other equally important areas of our lives. If drawing every day works for you time-wise and energy-wise, that's awesome and I'm happy for you. But it's not the only option, and the implicit suggestion when this advice is given that it's the only way to improve unintentionally encourages overworking that often leads to burnout. Drawing often or on a consistent schedule is much more reasonable of an expectation to set for yourself than drawing every single day. It allows you to to benefit from the consistency that's so fundamentally important, while still leaving you time and energy for other parts of your life without burning you out. And if you end up drawing every day anyway because you want to and you end up having time, that's awesome. If you don't, oh well, you always have tomorrow, and your schedule is built on both your improvement and your individual needs. I will acknowledge in fairness here that PewDiePie himself in the challenge does kind of address this when he says that his goal with the challenge isn't to draw a lot, but to draw a little every day. And that's fair, but even then, a little every day still isn't feasible for everyone. You should draw because you want to, not because you feel like you have to every day. Forcing yourself when the creative vibes just aren't there that day puts you on a fast track to artistic burnout. I'm not saying only draw when you're in the mood. Obviously, you're gonna have to push yourselves during study sometimes, even when you don't necessarily feel like it, but doing so all the time can set a dangerous precedent. Now, in PewDiePie's Draw Every Day for 100 Days challenge videos, he did essentially present both of these contentious pieces of advice as the basis for his improvement. He, at least verbally, primarily accredited his artistic growth to being the result of drawing every day and just practicing consistently, and suggested that if he, someone with little to no artistic skills when he started, could achieve this degree of improvement, anyone can if they do the same. And naturally, based on everything I just said, I disagree with that, at least on the surface. I don't think just drawing anything once a day for 100 days would yield PewDiePie's results for anyone who did it. I don't think practice or consistency are enough on their own for anyone to be able to grow as an artist the way that he did, to the degree he did, or with the speed he did. But I also acknowledge that there's a reason he did achieve those results so effectively, thoroughly, and quickly, and that's because he didn't just practice or draw every day. In fact, while I found his verbal explanation of why he was able to improve to be thoroughly lacking because he said it was solely practice and daily drawing that was responsible, I found his actual drawing practices to be the perfect example of how this bad, incomplete advice can be paired with individualized, personally tailored implementations of it to be exceptionally effective. Basically, I think PewDiePie is a perfect example of someone who took partial advice that doesn't work on its own and built upon it to create complete advice that does work, even if he doesn't necessarily acknowledge it with his words, but rather just his actions. Let me give you some examples of what I mean. Throughout Felix's challenge, he ran into several pitfalls typical of both pieces of advice. The first of which is that within the first few minutes of his video, he already openly acknowledges that the goal of the challenge is to improve, and that therefore the first few pages of his sketchbook in which he does nothing but doodle without direction won't help him achieve that goal. Already, he's addressed one of my biggest issues with the just practice advice. Just doodling aimlessly is a form of practice, but it's not a form of practice that pushes the artist doing it to achieve any significant degree of growth by challenging their skills or utilizing references to improve their ability to accurately depict realistic versions of real-life subject matter. Just practicing in the form of random doodling, while fun and relaxing, limits the artist to utilize nothing more than their current level of skill combined with only imagination rather than accurate references to create their work. So there's a limit to how productive drawing practice can be without adding active study to the mix. Immediately, Felix confronts this. Throughout the challenge, he shifts his focus from aimless doodling to the active, conscious utilization of tutorials from other artists, watching their content and learning the fundamentals as they come to be relevant to his work. Rather than directionless daily drawing, he creates a guided study plan tailored to what he wants to draw and improve at drawing. He wanted to draw anime, so he sought out anime-based tutorials, found anime-style references, and drew plenty of studies based on scenes from manga and anime that he enjoyed. What I was particularly impressed by was his ability to build his study schedule gradually. He built up his ability to draw basic anime girls by practicing based on references, and once he got comfortable with that, he started adding studies of facial anatomy to that in order to better his ability to depict those girls accurately. Then he started studying semi-realism to further develop those skills, and once he was comfortable with all of that, he realized he could only really draw faces from one angle and struggled with bodies. So he started implementing further studies of the human form and faces from a wider variety of different angles. And it went on from there. Once he was comfortable with that new artistic foundation, he continued to build upon it by experimenting with inking and coloring, effectively taking small but significant individual steps to improving as an artist, becoming confident enough in each new skill that he felt comfortable using them to create the best work possible, and then adding a new skill to study on top of the ones that he continued to hone by utilizing them in each following piece. It's a perfect example of how to use practice effectively. Tackle an area you struggle with, get good at doing it, and then tackle the next and build upon the skills that you've already developed while simultaneously developing new ones. This is what I mean when I refer to guided practice tailored to the individual. It would look different for each individual artist based on what they want to draw, so an artist who wants to make hyper-realistic oil paintings would have a very different study plan than someone like PewDiePie, who made it clear from the beginning that his desired artistic style was anime. But the core tenets of it remain the same. Yes, just practice, but practice each basic fundamental that you need to learn in order to make the art that you want to make in a way that allows you to feel confident in your ability to make work you're proud of before moving on to the next challenge that improves that work even further. further. Practice one thing until you're good at it, then add another, and another, and another. Exactly what Felix did. It's also worth mentioning that he addressed another issue with the just practice or draw everyday advice too. The fact that without reference to guide you, the potential improvement derived from that practice is limited. Throughout the challenge, he continues to be very open about his use of references, and not only does his use of them illustrate how useful they are in facilitating artistic growth, it also shows how motivational they can be when they're sourced from things that you're passionate about. On multiple occasions throughout both videos, Felix shares that he felt excited and motivated to draw certain pieces, not just because he had an artistic quota to meet that day, but because the reference that he was drawing from was his beautiful wife that he loves, or a panel from a manga he was really into at that time. It shows exactly how much of a difference it can make for an artist to draw things they sincerely enjoy, rather than just drawing to fulfill the daily art minimum. Indirectly, and perhaps unintentionally, Felix confronts the issue of daily drawing potentially being draining or causing burnout, by showing that if what you draw daily happens to be something you really enjoy or care about, it won't feel like a chore or obligation to draw it. So you get both the practice that you need for growth, and the artistic satisfaction and validation of having drawn something that matters to you. It's one of many things he doesn't necessarily outwardly acknowledge or comment on as something he deliberately chose to do for that reason, but rather something that he implemented into his artistic process as a result of, presumably, personal preference and good sense that ended up resolving a potential problem with this approach inadvertently. Finally, the last major issue I have with the just practice and draw everyday advice is also one that Felix actually faced a bit of criticism for throughout the series. And it's that if you just draw the same thing over and over again, practice and consistency will eventually stop being enough to yield improvement, and you'll hit an artistic plateau. Drawing headshots of anime girls every day will eventually make you very, very good at drawing headshots of anime girls, but not a whole lot else. You'll still struggle greatly with backgrounds, characters of other genders or ages, dynamic angles and expressions, anatomy, composition, color theory, and so on, because you quite simply have no practice with them. You may know how to render an anime girl's hair and skin with expert precision because you've done it 100 times, but if you only learned how to by studying references to replicate, you won't understand why your rendering techniques work based on color theory or values, but just that that's how they worked for the subject matter that you referenced. As a result, you won't be able to apply those techniques to anything other than the anime girl headshots you already know how to draw. PewDiePie does acknowledge this pretty honestly and on multiple occasions, and as I mentioned earlier, did confront the shortcomings of the limited subject matter he was studying by also practicing dynamic head angles and bodies. Even so, because those more diverse, difficult studies were few and far between, his improvement in those areas was subsequently a lot more limited and less technically impressive than his improvement at anime girl headshots, which he drew vastly more frequently. It's a very good visual example of how just practice as advice without a well-rounded study plan is kind of like an unbalanced allocation of skill points in a video game. If you put all of your points into vitality and none into strength or faith, your Dark Souls character is gonna become the tank to end all tanks. Sure, you'll take 1,000,000 hits, but without any points in strength or faith, half of the game's weapons are gonna be impossible for you to wield, so your playstyle will be much more limited than that of a player who allocated their points more evenly. Art skills aren't dissimilar. Felix allocated almost all of his art skill points derived from his practice into headshots in an anime style, and subsequently became exceptionally good at drawing them. But because he didn't allocate any into background or composition and put very few into anatomy and color, his ability to depict anything other than those headshots in that manner, with similar expertise and accuracy, is extremely limited. But I don't mean that in a way that's altogether critical, because it's something he acknowledges. His goal, since the beginning of the challenge, was never to become a master painter who could draw anything from a hyper-realistic Renaissance portrait of a slightly melancholic but tragically beautiful heiress, to a chibi of the Duolingo owl showing up to a Denny's parking lot to kick your ass for missing your Spanish lesson without a streak freeze. He wanted to draw cute anime girls, and the way he practiced reflected that goal. There's a lot to be said about the pretentiousness of the art community, something I plan to make a video about in the very near future. There's this unspoken but almost universally accepted belief that any art that is anime or cartoon-like is lesser than its more realistic counterparts, and that hobbyists who just want to draw what they like have little to no artistic credibility or worth compared to professionals that can draw anything. And I'm planning to make a video about it because I think that's stupid, and this is a prime example of that. PewDiePie didn't start this challenge to become a professional artist with a well-rounded skill set that would allow him to depict any subject matter expertly. He did it so he could see if he could teach himself to draw stuff he liked. His goal was never, at least to my understanding, to learn all of the fundamentals and develop a complete and thorough understanding of every artistic skill needed to draw any subject matter, realistic or otherwise. It was to draw pretty anime girls, and you can judge that all you want, although I'm judging you for judging it, but you can't deny that he achieved that goal. He tailored his practice to that goal, and subsequently that practice allowed him to achieve it. No, it didn't allow him to achieve more than that, but achieving more than that was never his intention in the first place, again, to my understanding. He taught himself to draw the thing he wanted to draw, and yes, that means he probably doesn't have the skills to draw much else because he didn't practice anything else. But who cares if he never had any interest in drawing anything else anyway? I actually think that the single-mindedness of his practice wasn't necessarily a bad thing. It proved that what you practice is what you improve at, so it's important to tailor that practice to your particular goals and specifically draw the things that you want to be better at. It also proved that you don't have to be good at drawing everything to be good at drawing one thing, that you don't need to religiously study all of the fundamentals in order to do so if you have no interest in widening your skill set to include other subject matter, and that hobbyists can both improve at the things they enjoy drawing for fun and also be free from the obligation to study things they don't enjoy drawing just because there's baseless, unfounded, pretentious pressure to. Ultimately, I think that PewDiePie's Draw Every Day for 100 Days challenge videos were inspirational, and were absolutely proof that drawing every day and just practicing are both bad pieces of advice on their own and excellent foundational advice to build upon in practice. I don't mean to suggest that Felix did anything wrong by concluding the series with the advice to just practice and draw every day. In fact, I think he thought he was giving different advice altogether, because to him, just practicing and drawing every day meant consulting tutorials and references and building a study plan tailored to his goals and challenging himself with new forms of study and building confidence in his existing skills before tackling and honing new ones to develop based on that growing foundation. So of course he's going to recommend other artists to do the same, because that's just what practice and draw every day mean to him. But that's not what it means to everyone, and the common sense that he applied to that partial advice to build it into full advice is not something everyone shares. He showed viewers how the advice can be built upon to empower every individual artist to reap its benefits in their entirety, but he didn't actually verbally articulate or explain how he did so. Analyzing how he approached the challenge makes it clear how he expanded upon that basic advice and subsequently turned it into something vastly more helpful that actually would yield improvement, no matter how skilled or unskilled the artist utilizing it is. But you do need to actively analyze it and take it apart to recognize how he did that. And that's why I think the public response to it has been so torn between people finding it inspirational and people finding it demotivating. The people who find it inspirational likely see all of the ways that he built upon that basic advice to make it into something that they too could follow and grow with. And the people who find it demotivating are hearing the advice, just practice or draw every day, and struggling with the fact that they've already been doing that and haven't achieved anywhere near the same results, because his videos fail to explain that what he's doing in them isn't actually just practicing or drawing every day. It's a lot more than that, and artists seeking similar results have to do more than just that in the same way he did, which they may not have already been doing. So in conclusion, yes, PewDiePie's improvement as a result of drawing every day and practicing consistency was incredible and is a testament to the power of hard work and guided, dedicated, disciplined study. And he's right when he says that anyone can do it if they apply the same work ethic, time, and energy to it that he did. But when Felix says just practice and draw every day and you can be like him, I don't think that's true, and I think it sets a lot of artists up for failure. You have to just practice and draw consistently and also do all of the other things he did throughout the challenge that make that consistent practice effective. He didn't outwardly state or explain why the things that he did were so important, at least for the most part, with a few small exceptions like references. Perhaps because he thought it would be obvious, or perhaps because he himself wasn't fully aware of why the things he was doing were so effective at combating the shortcomings of the advice he was following and giving. But regardless of his reasoning, that lack of context and explanation has led to a lot of people taking just practice and draw every day away from this whole thing as if that's all they need to do, without seeing the rest of the art advice iceberg that's hidden below the water. The artistic practices that he utilizes throughout the videos exemplify that hidden context, but without verbal acknowledgement or explanation, a lot of people are left kind of missing the point. Yes, PewDiePie improved massively by practicing and drawing every day, and you can too, but not just by practicing and drawing every day, because that's not actually all he did. There are plenty of other things Felix did throughout the challenge to streamline and boost his artistic growth, and if you want to see similar growth of your own, those things are just as important to include and implement in your studies. His hard work and artistic improvement are absolutely inspirational, and his practices and methods are both very productive and an excellent example for artists to build upon in their own creative journeys. That's the takeaway that matters here, because that's the perspective that would allow artists viewing it to set themselves up to achieve similar results. If PewDiePie can do it, so can you. It's not quite as simple or straightforward as his explanation of his process might suggest, but it's a shining example nonetheless of how smart, guided study can help anyone of any skill level achieve their individual goals as artists. Thank you for watching, and I hope you enjoyed today's video. Special thank you as always to channel members Joseph Solomon, TC Pratt, Zelda Deverak 42, Abyss Reborn, Haruki Kyle, King Good James, Art of Amethyst Fable, Cutie Sailor Lovely, and CP Lil Thing, as well as patrons Batman, Kyle Lowe, Blue Swanson, Cora Fear, Jamisha Walker, Elengshi, Kim Yin, Crazy Asar, Gen Tong, Grayson Xavier, MG, Blah Mage, TC Pratt, Finn, Grim Spectre, Celine Merriman, Ash, Eldritchia, The Stray Dog, Allura, Greg Noble, Decagon, Jenny Chan, Captain Reku, Ryan M. Williams, Cat Bus, Alec Brenakainen, Mac, Lucy Yamajiki, Selena Beebe, Electamike, Pride, Totally Shogun, and Insomniac Sleep Schedule. And I'll see you in the next one.